Hello and welcome to a new video on VMware vCloud Automation Center 6.0. In this video I want to show you how to do some basic vCAC infrastructure as a service configurations. My name is Yves Sandfort, I'm CEO of the comdivision group. You can find me on Twitter at my Twitter handle Yves Sandfort or drop me an email at y.sandfort@comdivision.com. Let's start by opening a new web browser. Again, move to the vCAC server. In our case, we want to move to the vCAC fully qualified domain name or IP/shell-UI-app or the appropriate tenant app. We are going to log in via SSO. Again, same user, vCAC admin at cab.vdc.cdip.net. That's the one for our tenant domain. We type in the password and hit login. This typically takes a couple of seconds just because we need to jump via SSO into the system. Again, you can see I have a pretty empty system, nothing in my inbox so far. So let's jump to the infrastructure. If you have watched the videos before, you might see that this is new. So blueprints is something we want to add next. Before we can add blueprints, we need to do some basic configurations. A blueprint is basically like a template in vSphere. In this case, we want to give it a machine prefix, we give it the number of digits and where to start. If later on we provision machines, they will just, if we don't give a different name, start with DEV dash and then 001 and it will move on through the systems. Before we can do that, we need to create a business group. A business group is basically like a business unit. It defines people who can operate certain tasks within your system. So again, we give it a name. In our case, we use the example of creating a development unit. You can fill the description. Pick the machine prefix we just created. You always need to pick a machine prefix. In general, business groups can share machine prefixes and you can also specify them later on a per blueprint basis. Active Directory domain, that's mainly if you provision Windows machines. But anyway, it's a good best practice to always provision an Active Directory container, so an OU, to actually put machines in. Group Manager, this is a list of people who can actually manage the group. So they can, on one hand, create new objects, act on other users' behalf, manage environments, manage infrastructure. So that's what the admins can actually do. Second, what we want to create is send manager emails that if there are approvals or any other processes not working or whatever else the system has to manage, that's the central mailbox for that. Why don't we just leverage the AD account? The point is you want to make sure that all see the same picture. If someone has actually reacted on an email already, he can actually put it away. That's impossible if everybody gets a unique one. So with this, the central account could also lead to a ticket system or something like that. Support role, that's users who can actually help other users if they run into any issues. They can act on other users' behalf, they can take over control, manage machines for them, but they don't on their own, cannot actually create anything. And then we have normal users, that's typically those people who are going to leverage our catalog and request machines. This is also the point where we want to create the first custom property. I find it always a good best practice that each business group has their own folder within vCenter. So we define on the business group level that we want to create all the machines in the VMware Virtual Center folder development. Once all that is completed, hit the OK button. Again, the system will validate all your settings. And once the validation is completed, you can see that you have a new development. Let's go back to the main infrastructure menu and let's continue with a reservation. A reservation and reservation policies are necessary to define who can do what and to actually prevent some massive VM sprawl. In our case, we want to create a reservation policy named Compute Policy A. That's something how we can link different resources together and specify which resources can be leveraged by which machine blueprint. You could also use that feature to define which specific machine can we run in which specific data center or something similar. Beside the compute policy, we also want to create a storage reservation policy. Again, these are basically only linking units. They are not, as you can see, we don't really define any policy terms. You would define those in the reservations and the blueprints. This is just to actually link these different resources together. So once we have created our policies in here, we are going to move on and create a network profile. A network profile that basically defines and is a bit similar to, if you know the IP pools back in vCenter, that's a bit similar. It actually links the information of the network configuration like subnet masks and stuff like that, and gateways, DNS, back to an actual port group within your system. So in our case, we call it cap-x-network. We give it the subnet mask, the gateway, the DNS information as far as we need it, and then we quickly hit OK. Point here is, once you hit OK, you need to manually you go back in there, hit edit, and actually then you specify the IP range in it. That is basically behavior I still do from the old 5.2 area. It might work actually differently already in 6.0, but that's my best practice. I always save the network profile before I define a network range. Again, for the network range, that's IP addresses for static IP assignments we want to use. So again, we give it a name, a starting IP and an ending IP. And what you can see once you hit OK is that the system will actually populate the list down under defined IP addresses and show whether they are allocated or not. You could also leverage a CSV file or something else to update your network profile. Coming back to our reservation, now we can define a reservation. Don't get confused by the term reservation. Reservation within vCAC, it has nothing to do with the reservations as you know them from vSphere. A reservation in vSphere is typically, it's a guarantee. You guarantee a virtual machine that you have the resources available and make them available. Within vCAC, that is more or less a promise that you will make them available. So again, you give it a name, you pick the compute resource. That's the endpoint we created in one of the last videos. You give it a name, you define the tenant in which it can be used, the business groups and all the other parameters. And now we need to specify the sizing of it. So in this case, we want to give this resource 8 GB of memory, and we want to over provision our storage a bit. We only have 100 GB, but we actually provision 100 GB. You could specify a resource pool, but we are going to skip that. And also, we are going to leverage a network port group, and the network profile we just created is going to be linked in here as well. If you are going to leverage something more complex with VCNS, you can also specify transport zones and stuff like that. If you want to get an alert on capacity misusage, you can actually set that up here as well. But if that's not the case, then you might want to just move on from here. Once the reservation is actually created, you are basically good to go to define your first blueprint, which will be one thing we do in one of our next videos. Thank you for watching this short presentation. My name is Yves Sandfort. This video was talking about VMware vCloud Automation Center 6.0 basic vCAC IaaS configuration. You can find me on Twitter at my Yves Sandfort Twitter handle, or drop me an email at y.sandfort@comdivision.com. Thank you. See you soon.